I'm glad you made it on. How are you, Melinda?
Yes, I'm doing well today, Lauren. Thank you for asking. It's a busy Tuesday.
Oh,
Oh,
doesn't
my
stop.
aunt is here. Okay, my aunt Sheila from Atlanta is on the is watching me. She sent a note. Hey,
I
Aunt Sheila.
love the support.
I do too. I tell you, family's everything.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time to sit and chat with me today. I know all of our tuned in listeners are very excited to hear from you with your very impressive career across numerous CPG companies. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, could you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how it led to your current role at Henkel?
Absolutely. Well, it has definitely not been a linear path. I have actually been in marketing for about 15 years. And I actually started my career, well, it's not that surprisingly. There's a lot of engineers in marketing, but I actually started my career as an engineer selling chemicals for a paper and chemical company. And I decided to go back and get my MBA, and that's when I transitioned into brand management. And since then, I've been working at a variety of companies in the beauty industry, in CPG. So my longest tenure has been at Procter and Gamble, where I started my career, and I was there for 9 years. And I worked across multiple brands. Some they still own, some they don't today. But I worked as a in market leading like the regional business. I've worked in upstream innovation. I've done some stints on shopper marketing. And then I'm most recently coming from L'Oreal, where I was at L'Oreal for about 5 years, leading one of the multicultural business portfolios, a brand called Dark and Lovely. That's part of a bigger group of brands under Sofsheen Carson. So a very historic brand targeted towards African American women and men. And then I was supporting the Target team leading shopper marketing for the L'Oreal Paris brand. And so I've been at Henkel for about 3 months. It feels longer, but it's been a great transition for me. So I was coming from the shopper marketing landscape, which was very exciting and unique to be in, during when the pandemic hit. And now I've moved back to managing a brand and owning the P&L and running the day-to-day US business for their hair care business. So Henkel has two major brands. One's called Schwarzkopf, which is primarily a hair color brand. And then the second brand is called Got to Be, which is a hair styling and hair care and hair color, business. But what's been exciting for me to kind of make the transition is throughout my kind of marketing career, in addition to kind of gaining skills and understanding how brands and consumers and businesses work and what we need to do to drive ultimately sales and profit, I've always, primarily because I'm a woman of color, I've always been the one working on the multicultural aspect. So even from my earlier days, whether it was, oh, we think this hair color brand will work well for a Hispanic target, or, most recently when I was actually leading a business that was specifically targeted to African American men and women, I've always kind of been that person kind of helping to champion and making sure we're reaching a diverse target. So that was very important to me when I moved to my current role, which I'm at now. And I think it's, really at an interesting intersection that I can take my experiences and my passion for making sure that I'm working on a brand that is purpose-filled and that is trying to attract and recruit and really, serve diverse populations, and making sure that I'm bringing that to a brand. Even though the brands I work on aren't necessarily multicultural or specifically, they're really made for everybody, but bringing that lens to the business. So that was important to me. And that's what's brought me here today.
Good. Thank you for sharing. That actually
Yeah.
kind of teased me up for where I wanted to take this conversation initially.
Yeah.
Obviously, I did a little bit of research about you prior to us hopping on this call. So not only did I notice your very impressive CPG career, but there was a little blurb in your LinkedIn about section that really caught my eye. And I hope you don't mind if I read a little section from it.
Not at all.
Okay. So you asked the question, how can we grow during times like this? The answer lies in identifying and genuinely speaking to the needs of diverse multicultural populations, the greatest untapped engine of growth available to most companies today. So Melinda, with that in mind, what is your perspective on how multicultural marketing has changed in the last few years, and what impact are you seeing from a business standpoint?
Absolutely. So no, that's a really pivotal line that I updated my LinkedIn profile with last year. Given all of the, I guess I'd call it like societal focus that came about with the murder of George Floyd, around making sure that as a society we were being diverse and inclusive. But then when you think about businesses and companies and brands, it was really eye-opening, because it was a huge pivot and opened everybody's eyes up to kind of a bigger consideration that I think when you're working, as a woman of color and a Black woman, we're about 10% of the population. So the majority of people that you work with on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily look like you. But it was that raised consciousness that kind of changed things. And as when you ask the question, how have things changed? Like I talked about in the beginning, years ago, it was if you had a specific product that was geared toward a segment, or a kind of underrepresented minority segment, you might have a person working on that. Or if you in your research and your business analysis discovered, oh, I have a group of people who are using my product, I need to speak to them better. So you might develop a different piece of communication, but it wasn't really integrated throughout like the business or brand DNA. And then over time that changed. So it definitely, you started to have more consciousness of it. People couldn't move away when you look at the numbers of Hispanic and African American buying power, over $1 billion, as a business that's not for profit, that's trying to make money. You look at that and go, okay, clearly the demographics are changing. I need to make sure that my products and my communication are being inclusive. But it really, things leapfrogged with this past year. And so I think the biggest change I'm seeing is that, one, everybody is talking about it and educating themselves, which I think has been really great. But two, there's a lot of changes in consciousness to make sure that it's not an add-on, that it's not a separate, oh, I have a different plan that's just multicultural. I do see businesses and brands and counterparts in the industry really trying to make sure that it's integrated into the business's DNA, and that it's thought of at all levels, for whether that's internal to when you're developing new products and testing things, all the way throughout the supply chain of bringing something to market and bringing a communication to market. There's considerations and people are thinking and talking about it. So, I'll give an internal example, because I actually did a lot of work this past year when I was at L'Oreal, and even now continuing at Henkel, and making sure that organizationally we were being very diverse. But there's an interesting thing that specifically is brand new in Henkel, that as we're this term unconscious bias, everybody went through unconscious bias training to make sure that we were all, putting all of our inherent, and everybody has them, biases aside when you're evaluating people or looking to hire talent. But most recently at Henkel, we are now requiring that there be a person of color on every interviewing panel, to make sure that there is representation, to make sure that someone with a different perspective is looking at internal talent, with a different lens, and that it's not all, a homogeneous group, which I think is great. And people have differing opinions on it, because when you are underrepresented, then the spotlight gets on you. So, of course, I'll probably be asked to be on a lot of things because I'm a person of color, but people have differing opinions. It doesn't bother me, because I know that it's for progress. And, sometimes you have to sacrifice, or have to expose yourself, or have to be, you have to sacrifice for the greater good. But I think it's just one example, and there's many more.
Yeah, no,
But I think it's I think it's yeah, no, I think it's a great question. But yeah, there's so much has changed, and what's great is I see it continuing, which is awesome.
that is very encouraging to hear. I'm sure the oh my gosh, proliferation of data has contributed to kind of identifying these audiences, maybe places where you want to be. And I think you even mentioned, there's maybe different messaging we want to send to certain audiences. So, to get into the conversation of data, which everybody loves, I'd love to get a sense from you, what data are you using it? How are you using it, particularly as, the consumer goes through their journey?
Absolutely. So, like probably multiple industries with COVID brought this proliferation. And digital was already a big deal, so don't get me wrong, it's not new, but what it did was really it pushed a lot of people who maybe it wasn't at the top of their list or they weren't kind of engaging in digital commerce and digital platforms in a meaningful way. When the world kind of shut down, everybody was forced to. So a lot of what I work on now, and especially because I combine that with the brands that I work on, and in particular, the Got to Be brand I worked on is actually targeting a Gen Z target. So our media plans are pretty much 100% social, 100% digital, and online videos. So the data that I'm always looking at, and I would say this is probably true of anybody like in CPG, we're always looking at our return on spend. So whether that's from a actual like paid perspective, looking at like return on ad spend or looking at the ROI of like everything in our marketing mix. That's usually the number one metric you look at. But then, to dig deeper, you're also wanting to look, especially as you think about social, like what do our engagement levels look like? What do things like, and depending on the type of vendor you're working with, what does the consideration look like, which is the precursor to whether somebody actually buys something. One of the things though I like to dig into when I'm working on brand or looking at what other competitive brands are doing or looking what's going on in the market is I'm a comment reader. So and especially when you're targeting like a Gen Z brand, you really have to dig into social listening and the comments and really kind of suss out. It's kind of like the new age way of doing focus groups. So instead of like pulling people in a room and talking to them and getting like verbatims, your verbatims are your comments. So I look at comments a lot, and while it's not quantitative, what's great is it can give you a precursor to something that either maybe there's an issue or maybe there's something that's good that you hadn't thought of, or someone's using your product in a new way. I can't tell you how many clips I get from different team members, showcasing how a new way someone is using hairspray, whether that's to like smooth down your eyebrows, or I had an article the other day about women using bar soap with a toothbrush instead of gel to smooth down their eyebrows. Like just so many different, tips and tricks that you like, you get comments on. And then I think too, from a social listening perspective, it's important to kind of keep your ear to the ground on what's going on with your brand and, what things come up. So I'll give an example that, luckily it didn't really have it like a bad impact on the Got to Be business, but there was like a few months ago, there was a woman who had used, instead of using her Got to Be gel and blasting freeze spray, she'd run out and she used Gorilla Glue. And so she's known as the Gorilla Glue girl. And so while the issue didn't happen with our product was all in the press because that's what she ran out of, what she normally would have used. So, when that hit, it was okay. So it's not quantitative data, but we were able to make sure we reached out to her, make sure that we didn't get any bad publicity, she's now actually started her own hair care line, but, making sure that like we're, keeping up with what's going on with our products and how people are using them. So it's a qualitative piece of data, but very important, to stay on stay on the trends and stay on what's happening, not only with your own brand, but to just benchmark and see what others are doing. But, and the other great thing about data is there's so much of it. The tactics that we're using are constantly changing. So, I think it's really, I feel like I'm always learning. You're always getting a new report. You're always getting new information about your business that you can kind of leverage to inform your future strategy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kind of in the topic of evolution and change,
Mm-hmm.
how would you say D2C companies have changed what was a pretty traditional CPG landscape?
Yeah, that's significantly. They've changed it. They've changed it significantly. And I'll speak for beauty, but I think it's probably applicable for other things. I've primarily worked on their traditional, like established brands that, over the years have then established an e-commerce presence and have either, some of the brands have maybe dabbled in creating their own D2C brands, or, everybody is, trying to figure out how they can win with Amazon and some of the big brick and click e-retailers. And then what you've had in beauty over the past several years, but I think it's just most recently, it's just proliferated the market. And it's wonderful because it's created even more competition and forced everybody to do better, is you have creators who are creating their own small brands from a need that they felt wasn't being met in the marketplace. And what's been great about kind of this being digitally native is that you can come up with an idea, you can create a product to serve serve a need that hasn't been met. You can, develop it, create it, whether it's in your kitchen or wherever you start at how to make your product, and you can literally launch it online and start to sell it. And, this has been happening for many, many years, but as of late, you have more and more products like this, innovative products that are coming to market, outside of these big companies with huge R&D facilities. And so what I think is really cool is it's tapped into this consumer desire to, really have things that are personalized and that are individually made for you. And because these D2C businesses are very digitally native, they are very averse of how to drive their business online, how to engage with their consumer, how to take, that feedback and constantly innovate. And they're not afraid, because they're entrepreneurs. They're not afraid to take risks. And, like anything you start and do, you're not going to, you're going to have some stumbles, you're going to fall, but you get back up and you quickly get back up and keep it moving. And so I think this business model has, it basically has created this set of niche brands that are doing very well. And what the trends you start to see now are, you see these bigger brands looking at these D2C brands going, this is a business model that's working. And we need to figure out how to bring some of those learnings into the way we operate, into our business model. So it's this interesting phenomenon in talking to different people in the industry, in that the bigger brands are trying to figure out how they can be like the D2C niche brands. The retailers, while big brands usually come with big budgets and advertising dollars, and so they will always be a piece of the retail landscape. The retailers themselves, these small brands, are darlings because people want them, they desire them, they're cool. They don't have to play by the rules. And so you have retailers that are now rushing to stock their shelves with these smaller players. So it's this really inverse phenomenon, is that the big guys are trying to be more like the small guys in the way they communicate to consumers and engage. And the small guys are now highly courted by retailers, and are trying to figure out how to scale up and trying to figure out how to be like the big guys in terms of scaling. So it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think you're going to continue to see kind of the blurring of lines, especially because we're just in this kind of physical and digital world colliding together. So I think that the big companies are learning quite a bit from small brands. They're buying D2Cs. So, if you can make your brand successful enough, somebody will buy it and you become super rich. Maybe one day I'll be I'll be in that league. I do have entrepreneurial aspirations. I just don't know what field yet, but.
Well, you've got the blueprint. You have the perfect background to get it going.
Yes. I just need to like take a break and stop and think about it. But yeah.
No breaks. Zoom calls.
No breaks. Yes. But no, it's just an interesting phenomenon. So I love it because, eventually with the blurring, I'm not going to say everything's going to become equal, but they'll move closer together.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Thank you. I'm going to shift it a little bit and go to the kind of the theme of this Brand Innovators, which is women in retail marketing. So we'd be remiss not to talk about retail marketing for women in a discussion about women in retail marketing. So what do you think are the biggest challenges for CPG and beauty brands whose primary audience is women? And what are some ways the industry is tackling those issues?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I think it will probably vary by industry. I will say in the beauty industry, you tend to have more women, which is a great thing. Unlike some other industries that I'm sure, like especially in the tech industry where it's been dominated by men. So when I think about CPG and I think about beauty in particular, but I think it's applicable to everybody. The first thing I would say is CPG companies and brands have to stop and listen. Like listen, that's like step one. And I think when you're in a big machine and you're going, you hear you hear feedback, you hear trends. You have women employees, you have women consumers. But I think in this day and age with so many things changing around us and frankly, women having more buying power, there's, larger, slightly larger in size, they're more prevalent, they're working, they're waiting till they're a little bit older to establish families. I think it's important, one, for brands to listen and to really understand the kind of, just the same way you would do with a business or a brand, you stop and you listen to your consumer and understand what their needs are. I think CPG companies need to do that not only with consumers, but also with their organizations. And I'm a firm believer that an organization needs to reflect the community it serves. So if your primary consumers, this is a perfect example of her beauty. If your primary consumer are women and you don't have that same representation within your organization, you're mismatched. And the same goes for any other kind of diverse group. Like you need to be representing the community you serve. So that's step one. And then from a beauty lens, I think it's really important that companies remember that the communications that we put out, the messages that we put out are going to define how women in society think about themselves, and especially from a beauty perspective. What we put out there is what people see, what people aspire to. And while, as a grown adult, you like to think that, okay, I know who I am. I'm confident in myself. Everybody is influenced by images you see. And so I think it's a huge responsibility for the companies that are putting out the communication messages to be cognizant of that and to make sure that, they're being thoughtful in the communication, making sure it's grounded in authenticity and truth. Because it impacts women and it impacts the younger generation. So, when you see kind of great purpose-led campaigns that are empowering women, that are, I think I was just looking at like a recent Nike campaign, especially as we're coming into like the Olympics and how they really showcase women in sports. Like it's just great because small, little girls look at that and go, I can do that, And I think we think about brands, even as to whatever category, even something just small and that you don't even think is a big deal, everything has an impact in the communication we see. And what's great about the industry is you're starting to see people really take that to heart. You see, what I love from a beauty perspective is we're moving away from this idealistic perfection. There used to be a day back in the day, if you were doing a hair advertising spot, the hair had to be long and flowy. There was always a scene where it would blow back in the wind. And like, it was just the iconic like hair blow shot. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to see that because first of all, no, people aren't walking through a wind machine like that. And if you are, your hair is not perfectly like flowing in the air and coming back. So I love that we're moving away from these, standards of perfection that aren't achievable and that aren't realistic, and that you see, different brands starting to portray more, be authentic in that piece. And I think that's super important for women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a viewer and a consumer of media myself, I definitely see that shift in messaging, and I think companies will really see the benefit from it.
Agreed.
So I'm going to go to the Q&A because I think we only have about 5 more minutes. So here is a question. We know offline marketing drives online engagement. Given this, what would you say are the biggest challenges in offline marketing efficiency? And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. No, go ahead, Lauren.
I wonder if this question is also kind of about that relationship between, that broad reach, which, national offline marketing that drives to that digital engagement, like the balance.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. So I'll kind of answer that broadly and then kind of narrow in. The question asker is absolutely right. And I think one of the things that you've seen over the past few years and with this emergence of everything being omni-channel is you want to, we as marketers, we want to make sure that we're having the same consistent, oh good, we have more time. We're having the same consistent communication throughout the consumer's journey. So whether they're, watching something on their iPad or, I live in the New York City area. If you're, on a subway looking at the subway advertising or outdoor advertising, that it's consistent to when you go into the store and see the product, to when you're on social media and seeing someone talk about the product. There's that consistent thread. So from an offline perspective, one of the big things you use offline communication for is to drive that broader awareness and whatever those key messages that you're trying to get across. But what you want to do is make sure that does connect to what is seen online. So when you go online, is your product, is your PDP, is it clear what the product's about? Does the imagery look consistent and the messaging consistent with what I saw, to drive that broader awareness? And I think as marketers, it's really easy to get caught up in storytelling, which we all want to have great storytelling. It's super critical in this day and age because you have to have that emotional connection to people. But it's very easy to get caught up in the storytelling, especially when you're talking online videos and TV and things that drive that broad awareness. And then you get to the online environment and, that great thing that brought you in that was sizzly and exciting, like where is that online? So one example that it's the perennial campaign that I love. I mean, what I enjoyed as a consumer, but like the Geico campaigns, 15 minutes or more can save you 15%, zaniest ads. But the messaging is always the same, it's always that same, 15 minutes can save you 15%. It's been that way for years. And as crazy as the, whatever scenario they have, whatever nostalgia they pull from, and they have some really great writers. I love it. It's always consistent. So when you go online to do your research, you're seeing that messaging. And I think that's key. Don't let the storytelling get lost. And that's something, marketers have to keep it in check because we love a good story, but you have to make sure that your online communication is consistent, but then it's also helping to drive the conversion. So it's got a different purpose in that sense.
Right. Okay. Same listener has a follow-up question. Would you recommend use of QR codes in print to increase engagement?
I would say as of 2021, yes. So I feel like 2 or 3 years ago, QR codes kind of died. You needed when they first came out, you had to have a special reader, and so again, digital was prolific with, a younger consumer, but everybody wasn't necessarily on their phones all the time. And it might be certain demographics. And I would say, COVID, because we couldn't physically interact with people, QR codes made like a huge comeback. And now I see them on everything. I mean, when we were in quarantine and things opened back up, but you couldn't really still, you had the distance. I remember going to restaurants and everything, you couldn't get a menu. You just scan the little QR code and your menu popped up. And, here's my phone. Technology, I have two phones sitting beside me. Technology is great. I mean, I've been through every iteration of my iPhone. And yeah, there was the time you had to have an app. Now you don't have to have an app. You just scan it over the QR code. So I think convenience has made things better. Again, changed consumer behavior has made people more comfortable scanning their phone over a QR code. Because again, in the beginning of all this, you were like, well, is someone going to download something on my phone or spy on me? Or, there was probably a lot more skepticism, whereas people are much more comfortable operating in a digital sphere. So I would say yes. And then print is interesting. I mean, print's one of those pieces of the mix that, is still there. It's changing because a lot of the print publications are becoming more digital. But, we're seeing QR codes in store quite a bit on anything you can get it on to kind of drive to something that's additional education or information, or, there's really cool technology from companies out there that are like, you scan the QR code and augmented reality will come up and you can engage in a brand in a virtual environment. So there's lots of cool ways you can use QR codes. So they're back.
That might be a trend that sticks
They're
around.
back. Yeah, they're back. They're back.
And to the rest of our listeners, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A session or Q&A box. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'm happy to read those off. But Melinda, I'd also like to know, as a female in a leadership role, I'd be curious to know how mentorship has impacted your career. Is it something you sought out? Were there people along the way that kind of took you under their wing? We'd love to get some advice from you on that front.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you raised that as a question. So I've definitely had people who've helped me along my career, but I will tell you, and I think a lot of it just comes honestly from, I would have to say, just being a Black woman kind of growing up in corporate America where there's not a lot of people who look like you. I honestly didn't seek out mentorship until, I would say in the past few years in a meaningful way. I always kind of, and this is kind of more my guidance to those who are listening and to those who, how important having mentors and people to guide you are is, seek them early, and engage early. And I really didn't. I really just kind of worked hard and thought that, okay, I'll just work hard and that's how I'll do well. And I definitely had people who played a kind of a mentor role for me, for sure, whether formal or informal. But I didn't realize how important it was, I would say, until maybe the past 5 to 7 years. So not like at the beginning of my career. And I would say what I love, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and I have a lot of people reaching out to me, whether they're alumni, or whoever, like wanting to either chat or get advice and network. And, again, because everything has become digital, I think networking and reaching out and having a mentor has become so much easier to do. And I think those who can kind of get past the barrier of it feeling uncomfortable to do that are going to put themselves in a great place. Because for the most part, I mean, and you realize this as you get older, but people are people. And, either they're going to respond to you or not. What's the worst that can happen is they say no. And then, so those who can kind of push past that, I think are going to really set themselves up for success. So, and I think, have mentors that are like you so that you can, you have a commonality, but also definitely go, seek the advice of people who are not like you. And for me, I've recently been trying to find, been engaging people who are doing maybe something that I'm interested in, but I'm not quite there yet, to kind of expand my horizons and my thinking, and just kind of gain knowledge. So I'm a big fan of always learning.
I think that's such a great point. I think curiosity is really key to growth. And I also agree with your sentiment of, I wish also when I was younger, a little bit bolder and willing to reach out to people. I think what you don't realize that, people are really open to wanting to help and share their experience, and they like talking about their experience. So I would really encourage people similar to you, Melinda, to do that sooner rather than later.
I think we have, it looks like we have some questions.
Yeah.
I'm a multitasker, so I'm looking at the chat.
I've got
if you guys would see me at work, I'm always the person chatting and throwing in gifts in meetings.
So one question that's come in, how do your e-commerce and in-store audience and strategies differ?
Yes. So the biggest difference is where they're at in their kind of a little older term, but where they're at in their path to purchase. But even the path is not linear anymore. So it's really about situationally, if you're in store, you're in a different mindset. As you're probably, depending on who you are, you might be browsing, you might be trying to buy something on replenishment, but you're in the store, you're there for a reason, and you're in a different mindset. Whereas when you're online, and I don't know how other people are, but I like my nighttime, I'm online looking at all sorts of things to buy online, just kind of perusing. Yes. So you're in a different environment. So the strategy of how you communicate and connect, and it could be the same person, like who I am when I'm, surfing Amazon late at night, looking at random things, or who I am, running down the street to the Walmart or the Target or the Walgreens I'm the same person, but my mindset is different. So the engagement strategy has to be different. The communication has to be different. To one, when I'm online, excite me about it, get me to engage or to learn more, versus in the store where ultimately you want me to buy it. So what is going to get me to close that deal? And that's where the omni piece comes in, and that you want it to be connected so that they're doing different things, but the message is consistent. Right. That's the biggest one.
And then as a follow-up to that, how do you promote authenticity within your purpose-driven marketing strategies?
The number one thing is to make sure your strategy is built on truthful insight that is relevant for your consumer base, and one that you or your company can really own and really believe and can own it over a long period of time. That's the biggest way. Authenticity is this term that everybody loves to throw. It's used everywhere. But the key to being authentic, and this is in business and in life, is really consistency. If you're about something, or you want to stand for something, or you have a value, you need to uphold it consistently for a long time and all the time. Even when it's hard, that's the piece. Even when it's hard, you have to stand on that. And I think ultimately what we're seeing, you see it in life, you see it in business, and that if you do that, the reward will come. And that's not to say the backlash won't come. We're in 2021. You can't post something without somebody having a backlash or a negative opinion on it. But if it's built on an insight and you're believe in it, and you can say it truthfully, without choking on your words, then run with it.
Yep, absolutely. And then I think what we'll close on here is, what do you see as the biggest future challenge to retail and e-commerce, and what is the biggest opportunity?
The biggest challenge and opportunity. I would say the biggest challenge is, from my perspective, the unknown, because we hit a time, I think in the past 18 months, where everybody went in planning for something and it completely got tilted on its head. So I think as you think about retail marketing and being, marketing online or offline, the unknown is a big piece. I mean, there's so much change and it's happening very quickly. Keeping up with it and being able to be nimble is the biggest challenge. And then on the flip side, I think it's also the opportunity, frankly. Like I think in a competitive marketplace, that's kind of what makes it fun, is that you have things changing, you have pivots, consumers are always changing. And as we've seen, our landscapes are changing, and those who are out front, kind of at the forefront of the change, they're absorbing some of the risk, but the reward is great. So I think it's kind of a double-edged thing there.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk, sit and chat with me today, share with our listeners. You are certainly a wealth of knowledge. So thank you very much.
Melinda and Lauren, thank you both so much for that insightful discussion. Melinda, you definitely made your Aunt Sheila proud. So
I know, I'm gonna have to hit her up after this.
Yes, definitely. Well, I'm Claire Vandenberg. I'm going to be emceeing the rest of today's program, leading content and community here at Brand Innovators. But I really enjoyed learning about how your marketing strategies for Henkel have evolved over the years and how you continue to integrate cultural relevance into your brand's DNA. Looking forward to seeing what you do next and having you both back again soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Brand Innovators. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.